Okay then, this is presentation number 3, and we're ready to go with artistic development. So I call this Follow the Children, and the idea here is that we are learning how to pay attention to children's learning, and we are learning how to let them tell us what they need, what they will find most meaningful, what they will find most useful and interesting. The way I say it is that I say that in my short little phrase, follow the children. That's what that means when I say that. So, as you know, we've been talking about artistic development, what it is, and I'm not going to go into that again. At this point, the question changes to how is the framework used in classrooms? So how does the framework help us identify the work we need to do and what we're going to do in terms of helping our children learn? So presentations 1 and 2 really explored the framework in a lot of detail. This presentation turns more towards practice, so looking more at practice. And here on this slide again, one more time, is a repeat of the basic categories, the basic phases, what they're called, and how they lay out in terms of age, more or less, at least generally. Then we've seen this slide before in one of the other presentations, and this is a reminder that to say that art capacities, our ability to understand, participate, join in, collaborate individually with others, the way that those capacities grow, they run sort of in parallel with the development of other aspects of our human being, our human becoming. So social, emotional, physical, cognitive. These things are not separate. They're not one thing goes one direction while another thing goes a different direction. They're all entangled and braided together. The other thing to keep in mind is that not all children develop at the same rate, and individual children may waver back and forth in their own journeys. This example here, these images here, this is what you'll find in pretty much, in my experience, many classrooms, many early elementary classrooms particularly, is that a wide variety, a huge variety of ways of thinking and ways of engaging with mark making tools. So these were all made from the same first grade classroom, and the teacher was inviting them to draw yourself. That was the lesson plan title, the activity, simple just as it sounds. And you can see the huge variety in terms of mark making capacities, organization of space, and so on. And this is a review of my concentric circle diagram again. And repeating the same thing I said last time is that there is a value, I believe, in paying attention to the kinds of drawings, the kinds of maps that you make for yourself, because those maps imply ways of being used, imply ways of moving through the world. So in this case, rather than a stair step or a ladder, with individual stages of existence, one following the other, sort of discretely, one at a time, the concentric circles give us innumerable pathways, ways to kind of move back and forth and around in different directions. Even though we're keeping something of the idea of moving through phases, that is still part of this diagram. It's still part of the idea that we're talking about. But because it's not limited to one pathway, there's a degree of freedom, a degree of choice, a degree of flexibility that maybe a ladder, image of a ladder, a diagram that looks like a ladder would not give that same degree of mobility. Then I pointed out that we have I want to concentrate on the boundary zones between the various phases, but that looking at them as individual lines creates expectation, perhaps, of one thing comes next. One thing always comes after the previous thing, which in reality it's not the true. There is a doubling back, moving back and forth. In addition to sometimes linear progression, there's also sideways and backwards and upside down progression. These are convoluted trajectories, learning trajectories, our individual pathways. And then within that, we have this very amazing human experience of representation, the idea of representation, that we can point to the world and discuss that with our fellow humans. And we can know what we're talking about, that we actually can look at the same thing and say, that's right, that happens in the world. And your speech, your sounds coming out of your mouth, or your words on paper, or your drawings, they connect to those ideas. So now, in order to begin to think about how this is going to work in classrooms, we have to really kind of drill down a little bit farther into the difference between the manipulative phase and the pre-schematic phase. And keeping in mind that this is not a one-time transition. There is the idea of representation, but the manipulative phase and the pre-schematic phase doesn't necessarily relate to representation only, because long after you have acquired the idea, a learner has acquired the idea of representation, you might still find yourself working in a manipulative way with materials that are brand new to you. Okay, so we got to keep that a little bit separate here. And when we talk about the emergence of representation, we're talking about a conceptual milestone, a momentous event in the development of a human being, understanding how the world and the body or the individual relate to each other, and how we as individuals relate to our communities. It takes a long time to develop this, and it develops at different rates, but it's, to my mind, a momentous, amazing, miraculous aspect of being human. And very few other animals appear to have this ability from animal studies and from studies of the natural world. It appears that this is maybe not completely unique to humans, but very much more advanced than in the other species of our planet. So what I'm arguing here is that for art teachers, recognizing where this conceptual, cognitive, emotional threshold is on any learner's trajectory, on their learning path, recognizing that this is approaching, and then being able to help the learner, provide the learner with the right materials, with the right supports, with the right challenges, to help the learner really cross that threshold, work their way through the phase transition, is the purpose of being a teacher, in my mind. It's one of the strongest, most important purposes of being a teacher. This is, a very succinct way of saying what's going on, I think. It simplifies it a little bit, but it resonates in my mind, resonates with my experience, and I hope that it does with yours as well. Of course, it's up to you to figure out what kind of words to use to articulate this moment of transition, this moment of cognitive, emotional, social transition. So I say it as learning how to point with mark-making tools. And like I say, that art teachers, we're always on the lookout for this moment, for moments when we think our students might be learning how to point with mark-making tools, and paying attention, very close attention to that, and then trying to be as effective as we can to helping students feel successful, helping students feel challenged, and helping students to continue to go on. It's not a one-time thing. We see this happening in the marks that children make again and again. So this is how I would say the goal is for us as teachers. Notice the approaching threshold. Notice that the child, the learner, is becoming ready for a particular type of challenge, for a particular type of meaning making, and then design lessons that invite the learner to cross that threshold. Basically, the framework of artistic development implies that these are the specific goals of our practice. So now, being able to do this, recognizing this as a goal, that's perhaps one thing. But being able to actually do it, being able to plan and then enact lessons and then clean up afterwards, assess and put everything back together and do it again the next day, that takes a incredibly different set of muscles. Okay, so on the one hand, we're recognizing these things, and then on another hand, at another point, we're thinking about how we actually begin to enact them. All right, so let's go back here to this. If you were the teacher and this image, this drawing appeared in your classroom, became part of the shared history, let's say, the shared history of your learning community. So you might notice that the child's gained enough control to make similar size and shaped enclosures. We talked about this. I talked about this in one of the other presentations. And then to make multiple shapes and the relationships between those shapes, that's also very important. So you're recognizing that this is happening or this is appearing in front of you. So when we think about the manipulative phase, we might say, yes, this is a manipulative phase, but the thing that the teacher is looking for is what comes next. So yeah, manipulative phase, check the box, but that's not enough. And actually, that's not even enough with this image right here, because there potentially is, now if we were listening to the child, we might be able to say this without a doubt, but even though we're only looking at an artifact, we're only looking at the sketch itself, there's the potential here that in the draw a friend prompt, this child is beginning to enter into that discussion, that internal discussion about what representing a friend might mean and how certain marks will suggest a friend to other people in the room, other people who see the drawing. So this suggests that the learner is moving across this ability threshold, across this cognitive and emotional threshold. And that should set off alarm bells, get the teacher's spidey sense all tingling. Something momentous is happening here. Something deeply important, miraculous about human beings is happening right in front of us. This is the way I say it to myself, the way it seems most sort of succinct, is that we're following the children by paying attention to what they're learning and how they're learning it. So the way that they're learning it, and different children are going to reach these thresholds with different tools and different materials. Different impetuses will come up at different kinds of prompts. But our job as a teacher is to always be asking ourselves, by looking at what these children are doing, by listening to them, what kind of learning is happening right here in this artifact, in this drawing, or in this sculpture, this cardboard construction. And then also to be asking ourselves, what comes next? What comes next? The purpose of this is that when you're a teacher, you are not designing one-off pizza parties or one-off little balloon animals that just are fun to do for a minute and then they disappear. Everything that we do in a classroom, it connects to what comes next in the classroom or what comes in the next classroom. We're thinking about children as whole beings that are on a journey through life, and we're meeting them just for a brief moment, but that brief moment cannot be isolated into itself. It has to be thought of as expansive, as going forward and around and out in the child's life, in the child's learning trajectory. This again is your draw a friend. This is the draw a friend. This is the context of this picture that we've been looking at multiple times here. So they were made with oil pastels. There's 6 of them, obviously, made in a single kindergarten class. And they'd been given the same prompt as we were talking about earlier, very similar. Draw people who are important to you. So the challenge to the teacher, by seeing this and by being able to think about the way these marks imply positions on those concentric circles, brings up the challenge, makes the challenge really physically real, really viscerally real for the teachers. How am I going to engage children with equal potential of success and challenge when they are spread across such a wide part of the spectrum of meaningful making, meaning making, symbolizing, and use of the skills with this particular material. How am I going to do this? That's going to not do a disservice to any of the children, not the children who are, getting ready to cross into fully schematic, maybe even dawning realism? Well, not in this group, perhaps, unless we met this dude here and we recognize that his hair truly does stick up like this. Then we would be able to say, yes, this child has a potentially a much vaster reach than children who are not quite in that same situation. This is another example where we think also this is a second grade classroom, and this is an example I want to point out the difference in materials between the oil pastels and the pencils. So one thing that you know, and we're going to be exploring in some detail, is the difference between the kinds of marks that pencils make and the kinds of potential for detail that pencils invite. And you know, if you watch a child with a pencil, and even with yourself perhaps, your gesture, the way you hold the pencil, the way you kind of crouch over and look at the drawing, you get much closer to it because you can see the detail, the fine line of the pencil, compared to the more thick line, the blurry line, the color mixing of the oil pastels. This kind of choice that could be made would invite children to focus on details. And the teacher has to understand that, how the choice of materials, what materials are available in the room, invite certain ways of mark making. And then mark making is meaning making. They invite certain challenges around meaning making as well, just by the choice of material. We'll be talking a lot about materiality, but this is where I want you to really start thinking carefully about how your ideas of what is going on in the pictures is going to affect the way that you design lessons. So in this story here that I want to sort of clarify is that the teachers that were doing this, they were student teachers here in the Texas State a few years ago. You can find these examples in the lesson plan booklets. They're paying attention to the individual variations in the world, and they want to depict those differences with their own mark making. And the second graders, that's what they wanted. So the teachers knew that. They knew where second graders were, knew what second graders were looking for. So they came up with a self-portrait lesson. They give the children a chance to really focus on them, on their own selves. They gave all the kids a mirror on their table in front of them, and a large piece of newsprint paper with a pencil. And so they asked the children to look really closely at their image in the mirror, and then to draw what they saw. So they're asking the children to really pay very close attention to what they see in the world. They realize that children of this age, they're able to do this. This is something they're ready for. They're craving this sort of challenge. Kindergartners would no. Kindergartners probably not to the same extent. I mean, not normally. But when we look at the results on these images and look closely at them, you can see that the children really paid very close attention to the details of their own faces. And having pencils in their hands invited them to do that. That's a synchronicity between the materials and the prompt and the age and the teachers recognizing the awareness. So you can see small birthmarks or little scars or something, the shape of people's glasses, their hair, their freckles. They're very, very closely attending to what they see in the mirror. But look at the child in the upper left-hand corner. That child drew a somewhat different look and has somewhat of a different ability to maybe pay attention to precisely what was in the mirror. There's an individual difference in that image, which is clearly visible to me. And I hope that now that you're kind of your radar on what pictures look like, what children's pictures look like, that you're beginning to see that as well. But then even more interestingly than that is this last drawing and the characteristics here. How would you define or describe what kind of, what you're seeing in terms of the pencil? So look at the vast difference in terms of what the child has drawn. Remember, the prompt is there's a mirror in front of you, here's a piece of newspaper and a pencil, and look very closely at the mirror and draw what you see. Think about what you see. And this is what the child has drawn. How does this fit? What is going on with this child? Now, we have to be extremely careful about thinking that this implies anything about the child other than the child's ability to look at themselves in a mirror and hold a pencil in a particular way. We cannot, as we're not therapists, we're not psychologists, we're not trying to think about the way that the child might have a developmental a challenge of one sort or another that might need to be evaluated or diagnosed. Now, in a public school, you're going to find a vast array of children with different abilities and different developmental situations. You might indeed notice some parallelisms between the way children draw and what they've been diagnosed with, or what their IEPs are, how their IEPs are structured, their individualized educational plans, how they're structured. But on our own, in terms of looking at a child, our job is not to make any judgments like this, and not even to imagine those such judgments, but to pay attention to where the child is right now and how the child is right now doing the best they can to participate, to play along, to engage, to challenge themselves, and to see this as a positive motion through a curriculum or through a class, and to resist the urge to think of it as a deficit, as not being up to speed with the other kids, as being somehow deficient or behind the other kids. This kind of deficit thinking is completely, in my mind, uncalled for and unhealthy in terms of creating learning environments where everybody can be challenged and everybody can feel successful. So one way that teachers begin to understand how to think about their lessons is by giving children materials and setting up exploratory prompts, exploratory investigations with those materials, and looking across the room and sort of seeing where children are going, or what children are thinking or feeling, or how they're moving through those materials. One prompt that's very well known is the draw a person prompt, and I want you to look this up. There's some resources on our website on Canvas, but it's potentially, for you as you begin your practice, it's potentially a way to get children engaged in art making, and at the same time for you to really begin to get an understanding of how they are working through their own learning journey, how they are becoming fully engaged on their own. Draw a person prompt. This is an example. It's out of the book that you have that you're looking at, the Victor Lowenfeld's research. To wrap this up in terms of what we're doing in the framework of artistic development, it's not about giving hard and fast answers to the questions that we're asking about curriculum and about development, but rather it's a way to organize all of those questions to help you reach beyond your own individual limitations, your own individual biases. So there's two ways this happens. It's the eyes and ears and voices of thousands of researchers who have come before us, but they're here to help us understand what we see in our classroom. It expands our own vision, our own scope of what we're able to see. But we have to hold kind of loosely to what we immediately feel, viscerally feel, immediately right now in our own experience. We always have to be ready to say, okay, well, wait a second, I'm just one person, this is one thing happening here, what am I missing? What am I not seeing? What am I not getting? What can my research community, this vast community through time and space, what can they help me see? How can I work with their eyes and their ideas? The questions of what is being learned and what is being reached for. We're the adults in the room. The teachers are the adults in the room. And we have the broader perspective that can help children attain the goals that they want to attain, the way that they want to go. So in that sense, it's our job to follow the children. Because what comes next, it really depends on where we are right now, where we've been, and where we want to go. Okay, so that brings my lectures on artistic development to a close. Thanks very much for listening.